Alone I sat when the old one sought me, the terror of the gods, and gazed in mine eyes. Hey there, you beautiful heathen. Welcome to Iowa's Initiations. I'm your host, Matt Sargent. Thanks for tuning in today. Pretty excited about this one. Today we're going to be looking at the Voluspa, which is the first text in the Poetic Edda, and is generally considered to be, the beginning, the middle, and the end of Germanic heathenry. That said, when we look at it, there are several verses that give us very unique specific keys as to how Volva operated to practice Seidr, or maybe not practice Seidr, but the magic of the Volva. So we can use this text as not only an informative text about the creation of the world and the end of the world, Ragnarok, but we can learn how to practice the magic that our ancestors practiced. Before we jump into it, there is a caveat about language, and my two primary sources that I use are the Poetic Edda, translated by Henry Adams Bellows, and I'm also influenced by Voluspa, Seidr's Weird Consciousness, by Ngona Desmond, aka Valerie Rett. This is a great book. It's thought-provoking. I definitely have some issues with her translations. But one thing over the last 20 years is I've noticed that I struggle when I look at different translations of the Eddas, whether it's Voluspa or Havamal, or any of the sagas contained there within. What I get used to in one translation is a totally different story or verse in another translation, which makes me think that it's time for me to learn Icelandic. I've been daydreaming about picking up Old Norse because that seems way more romantic, but since the Eddas were written in Icelandic, it makes more sense to learn Icelandic and go straight to the source. So if you're interested in maybe joining like a Icelandic study club or something like that, leave a note in the comments, because I'm thinking about putting something together like that. That way we can all take a deeper look at our roots and maybe learn to interpret these for ourselves instead of trusting Henry Adams Bellows. Before we really get into it, we need to establish who the Volva is. In the text, she's known as Heiðr, and the stanzas 21 and 22 allude to the fact that Heiðr might be Gullveig's form in the afterlife. And I'm going to start towards the end of stanza 21. The war I remember, the first in the world, when the gods with spears had smitten Gullveig, and in the hall of horror had burned her, 3 times burned, and 3 times burned, often again, yet ever she lives. Heiðr they named her, who sought their home, the wide-seeing witch in magic wise. Minds she bewitched, that were moved by her magic. To evil women she was a joy. I kind of question the validity of the very last line being translated there, and whether or not it's really to evil women. But again, got to learn Icelandic so I can ascertain that myself. But right there we have it, that Gullveig becomes known as Heiðr after her trials with the Aesir killing her. And it's important to note that Heiðr means bright one. And so through this transformation, she becomes this illuminous being in her death. The other important aspect to note here, and it's even more important when we look at the shamanic practices throughout the world, there's a common case where the shaman or the practitioner of these arts undergoes what's known as the shamanic death. In this instance, Gullveig eventually succumbs to death and arises as a more powerful, luminous being, Heiðr. We're going to be starting with stanza 2. I remember yet the giants of yore, who gave me bread in the days gone by. 9 worlds I knew, the 9 in the tree, with mighty roots beneath the mold. The takeaway from this stanza is that the Volva, Heiðr, is ancient. She was raised by a giant. The Jotun are akin to her. Next up, stanza 5. The sun, the sister of the moon from the south, her right hand cast over heaven's rim. No knowledge she had where her home should be. The moon knew not what might was his. The stars knew not where their stations were. The moon knew not what might was his. It's very common for practitioners of witchcraft, regardless of culture, to pay observation to the stages of the moon. And that's because the moon has a great power. And the would-be Seidr, Volva, or Vicky would be wise to pay attention to the moon, and whether it's waxing or waning, a new moon, a full moon, and the power that the moon contains. And that brings us to stanzas 9 through 16, also known as the catalogue of dwarves. And I'd read it, but it'd probably put you to sleep. And it's basically a list of different dwarves, who begat whom, etc. It's almost like the Old Testament. It's interesting for two reasons. What I'd written in my notes before I reached out to the IWAS Initiations Facebook group, there's a link to it in the show notes, for their input. But what I had put down was that obviously if we're dedicating 5 stanzas to the dwarves and who's related to who, and etc., that the dwarves are powerful allies. There's no such attention paid to the Alfar or the Jotun, and this is really the only species that is chronicled aside from the Aesir. So the dwarves in and of themselves have a latent potency to be powerful allies. When asked in the Facebook group what passages bring about hints of magical practices within the Voluspa, Ivy Mulligan from the 21st century heathen, reclaiming the art of the Volva, commented that you have to pay attention to the dwarves because all of their names have very powerful meaning. Working with the dwarves can be a very transformative process, and if you haven't yet in your own personal practice, it's probably time to go pay them a visit, make an offering to them, and see what they can offer you. Next up, we're going to look at passages from stanzas 17 through 19. I'm not going to read all of them. I'm just going to kind of read the important ones so we can get to what I'm getting at, if you know what I'm getting at. Then from the throng did 3 come forth, from the home of the gods, the mighty and the gracious. 2 without fate, on the land they found, Ask an Embla, empty of might. Soul they had not, sense they had not. Heat nor motion nor godly hue. Soul gave Odin, sense gave Honor. Heat gave Lothar, and godly hue. So that's 17 and 18. And it talks about the first humans, Ask an Embla, Ash and Elm. And then when we jump into 19 and 20, we get a description of the Nornir. Thence come the maidens, mighty in wisdom. 3 from the dwelling, down neath the tree. Uth is one named, Verdani the next. On the wood they scored, and scold the third. Laws they made there, and life allotted to the sons of men, and set their fates. It's commonly interpreted that when the Norns are scoring this wood, that they are casting runes on wood that are associated with each individual human and god's fates. However, if humans were originally carved out of wood by Odin, Honor, and Lothar, are the Nornir really carving runes on wood? Or are they carving the weird directly onto the human skin? And it's also important to remember that runes doesn't always mean the Futhark runes. Runar also means mystery. So they're carving the mystery of our lives directly onto our flesh. If so, how much power do we have to grasp and control that? If you've watched other videos of mine, you'll know that I believe that we have the utmost control over our fate. Precisely the reason I get into the more mystical practices of heathenry is that I think that if we are all mindful of how the past has shaped us to be where we are today, that we can make a better future for ourselves and our descendants, thereby making us honorable ancestors in our own right, which should be the ultimate goal of any heathen. Moving on. V28. Alone I sat when the old ones saw me, the terror of the gods, and gazed in mine eyes. What hast thou to ask? Why comes thou hither? Odin, I know where thine eye is hidden. In this stanza, we see Heiðr, and she is sitting out, seeking wisdom of her own, or communing with spirits on her own, when Odin interrupts her and basically challenges her, or she challenges him as he interrupts her, says, I know your secrets, Odin. What can I do for you? If anything, this really points out the importance of Uttasita, or sitting out. If you want to learn more about Uttasita, check out the video in the corner of your screen now. 29. I know where Odin's eye is hidden, deep in the wide-famed well of Mimir. Mead from the pledge of Odin each morn does Mimir drink. Would you know yet more? She's saying to Odin right here, and this is a classic case of like battling sorcerers or whatnot. I know your secrets. Do you want to know mine? Do you want to know more? Or can you figure out your own secrets? We're going to finish with stanza 30, which I think is very important, especially based off of a lot of commentary I see online these days. Necklaces had I, and rings from hereafter. Wise was my speech, and my magic wisdom. Widely I saw over all the worlds. And this is one where different translations give it differently, but it basically alludes to the fact that Heiðr, the Volva, has been receiving necklaces and rings and gold, even from Odin, the Allfather himself, for her wisdom. And I see it all the time where, especially more New Agers, are saying, you can't charge for your gifts. Well, right here in the lore, we see that Odin gives an offering to the Volva for her knowledge. So as you practice your art, yes, if it's for your kin, give them the knowledge that they seek. But Odin is not Heiðr's kin. If anything, Odin had Heiðr killed in her original form. He's kind of an enemy of hers, maybe. But she's still willing to work with him because he's willing to pay the price for knowledge. And this is exactly what we see in the rune Gebo, or Gifu, if you want to use the Anglo-Saxon runes, a gift for a gift. In other words, whether you're offering the wisdom or knowledge of a Volva or Seidr or Vicky, you should be paid in recompense for the knowledge that you are giving.